So we're going all over the place. We're doing a lot of traveling and a lot of boots on the ground type stuff that we've been going through to try to really find some of this. And it's developed into giants and a lot of stuff we're talking today, which is Appalachian Giants, MoonEyed People again, and other forbidden history, basically dwarves. Dwarves are just really
just giving it away.
They have really introduced themselves to the whole story. And it's been eye-opening, I guess you could say, don't you think?
Yes, it definitely has. It's amazing the things that you think you know, but then you learn so many more things when you start looking into it.
Yeah, and in our little journey, I guess you showed there, we've we're going to places like Serpent Mound and and every mound you can think of, if it has the word mound, we've probably been there.
We have.
It's some of them are more breathtaking than others, and some don't have anything to do with giants. It's really just the history themselves. So Serpent Mound, if you've never went to Serpent Mound, then you owe yourself a trip.
Oh, it's amazing.
Fantastic.
It's amazing,
but we have a lot more places, a lot more earthworks. We've got actual state issued earthwork maps for different things that we're going and looking at. But as far as today goes, we are going to jump right into this since we already had a few minutes of technical difficulties.
Exactly.
If you will. And Stacy, just going to start off here with a little bit about Desoto.
Right. So basically, we're going to talk a little bit about giants. And, there's a long history of giants from Nephilim to, people that are really just extra tall, been called giants.
Gigantus.
And they've got, I just added a lot of pictures on here. I love this one picture right here. This is from the U.S. Capitol, and it shows this Native American that is very tall. And there's a lot of Native American lore for giants. And there is a story about Hernando Desoto, and this is a story from history where he encountered giants. And so the story goes that in 1539, he, landed in Florida. And there are 4 written accounts of this particular expedition, and all of them have been translated and cross-checked, and they all contain consistent details about this battle called the Battle of Mobila. And Mobila was
the thriller in Mobila.
It was located somewhere in Alabama, and it's never been found by archaeologists. It's not something that they've come across. It's just from these writings. But in October of 1540, Hernando Desoto received a visit from this emissary, and he was the son or perhaps the nephew of the chief named Tuscaloosa. And Tuscaloosa's son was described by the Spanish as a youth, 18 years of age, of such good stature that he was head and shoulders taller than any of the Spaniards or the Indians in the army.
I'll bet he was popular.
Basically a giant, according to what their definition was, the size that they were. And so they asked Desoto to accompany him to meet Chief Tuscaloosa. And so they made the journey, and whenever they got there, one of the chronicles of the story wrote that Tuscaloosa was an Indian so large that to the opinion of all, he was a giant. And they describe when he gets to where this chief is, the chief is sitting on a mound, one of these mounds like we've been going to look at. But also on the mound was a 2-story shrine or building. And they allude to the fact that a lot of these mounds and stuff had, buildings and shrines on them.
And a lot of our research has pointed to that fact. So you see the mounds everywhere. I can tell you from standing on top of several of these mounds, one of the first things we pointed out was it seems like there was something here. There should have been a structure here, and it really does point to the fact that there probably was at one time. But you got to understand, these are from truly ancient history.
Right. And so as the story goes, Tuscaloosa explained that there was another village that they needed to raid, and that if Desoto helped them, there would be riches there for him. Apparently that's how you got Hernando Desoto. You promised that there would be gold in the next village, and so he would go and help you.
Or he misunderstood when you said riches.
And they said that they saddled the biggest horse that they had for Tuscaloosa to ride to accompany them to this village, and he was so tall that when he mounted the horse, he his feet almost touched the ground.
Right.
And it was said that he had to be at least 7 to 8 feet tall for that to have happened.
They're
Like
so
you
huge.
could just see him riding the horse with his feet almost
I
right
mean,
up
for the
horse.
time period, you got to remember,
Right,
the
right.
average height was about 5'4", 5'3". I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yes. So, and this whole story is just that. I think the rest of the story is they just went and had the battle and, they won, but everybody was wounded. But, the whole point is that they had all of these accounts from all of these historians that all matched, that claimed that these, Native Americans were giants.
Right. Yeah. Which, I mean, and once you get into this, it's just mind blowing how many accounts there are and how many, how much proof we did have.
Right.
And the emphasis on did on that one. But you go to Kanawha Valley Mounds, we get back to what we're talking about here, more Ohio Valley, the Appalachian area with West Virginia and the Kanawha Valley Mounds. No area has yielded such a density as the Adena Mounds in the Kanawha River Valley in West Virginia. It's a winding river valley some 97 miles long, created by the longest waterway in the state. The river empties into the Ohio River at Point Pleasant. So, not that that's special or anything, right? An impressive complex of over 50 mounds, 10 earthen enclosures, and about a dozen stone wall formations found on mountains was once located on 11 miles along the river near Charleston, West Virginia. All but a handful of these structures have been obliterated.
Yes, it's so sad when you get to studying these mounds and stuff, and all you see are places where mounds used to be, or where they've built things and knocked them down.
It's insane. I know a lot of our friends, from Scarefest and stuff. You got a lot of people, Louisville, Lexington, in that area. Louisville had an abundance of mounds in the city. And, there used to be a house there that one of the first houses that was built in Louisville was all sitting on a mound. And they completely obliterated the mound. They got rid of these mounds. They got rid of a lot of stuff there because a lot of your bigger cities were built where the mounds were. And just like the mounds were built where the rivers were.
Yes.
So,
a lot of them are along the rivers.
People, settlers came in and they found these mounds and they, for whatever reason, they're like, well, this must be a good place to destroy everything. So, go to the Great Smith Mound. It's this one, I tell you, 35 feet high. Just below the top surface was a layer of flat stones, each weighing 100 to 200 pounds. Just below the stone layer was a huge skeleton. This skeleton was not measured because it was too far deteriorated. Something else you'll find. Sometimes there's stories like in the Louisville one, for instance. Those skeletons in that mound were so old, when they opened the mound, they turned to dust.
Yeah, that happens a lot with a lot of the remains, and that, I think that just proves how ancient.
Oh my God, yeah.
They are.
This skeleton was, like I said, it was under the tomb, and there were 2 more tombs under the tomb, also with badly deteriorated skeletons. Near the bottom of the mound was a large wooden vault that measured 12 feet square with a height of 7 to 8 feet. There were 5 skeletons in the vault. One central skeleton laying on its back, and one skeleton in each of the 4 corners of the vault, buried in a standing position, like sentinels. It is speculated that these standing figures may have been buried alive. The central skeleton measured 7 foot 6 inches and was adorned with copper bracelets, a copper gorget, and numerous black flint spearheads and points. Now, the interesting thing about copper, it's another thing you're going to see as we go through these more and more and more, is the way the copper comes through there. And if you can go up to Lake Michigan and get into the great copper mine there that's 6,000 years old allegedly.
Right, that was they found that years ago. I think that they dug so deep, they just determined it was about 6,000 years old, but they had to dig like through bedrock. It was amazing how deep you had to dig to get this copper out of there.
Yeah.
But a lot of the giant skeletons that you hear about, they all have copper bracelets or copper armor.
Like, one of the big things is, how did they even know where the copper was? Okay? That's what I'm talking. Now, we're pretty convinced that these giants weren't just some, ho-hum, ho-ho-ho, jolly green giants. They weren't just stupid, right? They were the prevailing theory, or one of the prevailing theories, is they were escaping persecution themselves, because the giants predate American Indians, being here, and that comes from actually, Indian lore itself, is from their verbal history.
Right.
But the giants, were already here, as were the little people, as were the dwarves, and
right.
That race. You call them what you want, but they're tiny little fellas.
The little people.
Yeah. So
yes.
They were already here, which is just so interesting in itself.
And so continuing with West Virginia, I have a picture up here of Creel Mound, and this is one that does still exist, and it's also one of the mounds that the Smithsonian Institution excavated on their own. And you can see what they found, and of the 13 skeletons that they unearthed in this mound, you can see at the bottom 11 of them there was one laying in the middle, and then there was 10 sort of in a wheel pattern, and that's a very common pattern that you get with some of these mounds and some of these burials. But the one in the central location is the giant.
Right.
I think in this case they claimed that it was about 6 foot 8 inches, which is not, doesn't sound like a giant to us. But it was big then, and it was the Smithsonian. You don't know if they've actually told you the truth.
Having a Smithsonian tell you is kind of like having a pro wrestler tell you his height and weight. So if he says 6'4", that means he's 6'2".
Right, right.
And with them, they go the other direction.
Also in this area, there were earthworks, like he said, and one is the Spring Hill enclosure, where they found 7-foot-long skeleton there. And then there is another mound called the Poorhouse Mound. It was 25 feet high. This is one of the ones that is no longer there. But inside that mound, they found 2 very large skeletons, is the way they put it, in a sitting position facing each other. And they also had copper bracelets, and that's another thing that you'll find along with these burials. You'll find people intertwined or holding hands or facing each other or holding something together. It's very, very ritualistic.
Oh, absolutely. It's very, very strange, man. It's just and the weird thing about this, guys, is it's the same if you're in Washington State all the way to the East Coast. Okay, that's one of the weirder parts about it, because you're talking, what 10,000 years ago? We don't know.
Right.
We really don't know. I mean, they can date this and say, well, we think it was 200 BCE. Man, they don't freaking know. The thing about it is, regardless if it was then or if it was 1400, right? Being able to have this kind of communication across the board like that is ridiculous. And, we're not going to dive into it too deep today, but there is somewhat of evidence of even trade with places like Egypt and all this that did exist around the time.
Right.
More West Virginia though, because you can never get too much weird out of West Virginia. West Virginia is a weird paradise. So
especially for this kind of stuff.
Oh yeah. Dr. Sutton believes a tribe of giants once inhabited Charleston. Is from the Charleston Gazette. It didn't inhabit the Charleston Gazette. This comes from June 15th, 1930. All right. Excavation of 2 mounds near Morganville in Doddridge County, about 11 miles west of here, revealed what Professor Ernest Sutton, head of the history department of Salem College, believes is valuable evidence of a race of giants who inhabited this section of West Virginia more than 1,000 years ago. Professor Sutton revealed tonight that he had been excavating the 2 mounds for the past several months. Skeletons of 4 mound builders, indicating they were from 7 to 9 feet tall, have been uncovered. The best preserved skeleton was found enclosed in a casting of clay. All of the vertebrae and other bones, excepting the skull, were intact. Careful measurement of the specimen indicated it was a man of 7.5 feet tall. Now that that comes directly from the Gazette, and get you one of the best things that will ever serve you is a good subscription to newspapers.com.
Yes.
Because you can go in there with keywords and find so much stuff. It's just a treasure trove of things to find.
And I know when you're looking at articles, you'll see Professor Sutton's name several times. He was a firm believer in the giant race that inhabited the area beforehand. He didn't let anybody tell him otherwise. So another interesting thing about West Virginia, just on a side note, is there's a place there named Camden Park. And I got some pictures of it here. And
so cool.
Camden Park is a 114-year-old amusement park in Huntington, West Virginia. And it started as a stop on the Camden Interstate Railway. And it has a number of vintage rides. And it's this real retro feel. You can kind of tell from the sign. But what a lot of people don't know is that it's also an ancient burial ground. Because if you look behind this ride right here, over here, this is a burial mound. And absolutely, it has not been excavated. Yeah. Nobody has ever dug into it, but it is a mound. And there is most likely bodies buried in there. And so people claim that the park is haunted. It's rumored to be haunted. Supposedly visitors report seeing ghosts.
We had to include this just because it mixes our worlds.
Right.
So we
anytime
really
you
want
get a haunted burial mound.
Yeah, we really want to investigate this place for the book. Well, we got to contact them and say, hey, look, we're paranormal investigators and, but we're writing a book on giants and you got this mound. And
Lori, I don't know if Camden Park is still open. I know it was as of the time of the article that I read, which was fairly recent.
If it's not still open, we'll just have to see how good the security guard is. That might take care of it, Lori.
I mean, I'm sure the mound is still there. Clearly.
And yes, they may have been dowsing for copper. I just seen that on there. That's, I mean, hey, anybody's guess is as good as mine. I think it's insane that they had to go below bedrock to find that stuff.
To find the copper, yeah. I know. So some more stories from the Appalachian region, because there are just so many. Honestly, the Appalachian region is, I believe, the most concentrated area.
It is.
That you get with giant burials. But there is this book called The Natural and Aboriginal History of Tennessee. It's from 1823. It was written by a man named John Haywood. And he has some really interesting, anecdotes in here about
boy did this document not age well.
Yeah, no. Of giant discoveries in Tennessee and the area. And I was just going to point out a few that I know are in there. Now, he wasn't real good about putting specific dates, but he did have the stories in there. And there was one story in there that was from 7.5 miles north of Pulaski, Kentucky. And it was on a plantation of a man named Colonel William Shepherd. And it was near a creek, because that's how these happen all the time. There was a cave, and the cave had several rooms. The first room was 45 feet wide, 27 feet long, and 4 feet deep.
Jeez.
And in this cave, there was a passage which had been so covered so well with stones that it defied detection for a very long time. And the way the mouth was, there was a huge stone leaning up against it, covering part of it, and then another stone, sort of how you could roll the stones away and you would see the opening. And when they finally discovered this opening and they moved the stones away, inside this hidden room, there were several bodies, several bones. And the most interesting thing about this cave is the floor of the cave, the whole bottom floor of the cave where the bones were laid, were flat stones of a bluish hue, and they were closely joined together and of different forms and sizes. So that tells you that there is a lot of work going on there to take stones and fit them so closely together that there's no space in between.
Wow.
Which is really unusual.
Yeah.
And now caves are another place that you do find a lot of giant burials, especially when there's more than one at a time.
That's really impressive.
It is.
So how close were the stones? You're saying
they were touching. It says that they were closely joined together, so they were all touching, creating a floor on the floor of the cave in Kentucky. So that's just one of the anecdotes that's in this particular book. There's another one, a couple of them from Nashville, where there's...
That's just so impressive, though. I mean, it's just like something, I want to sound like the narrator on Ancient Aliens right now. They were so close. They were touching.
Well, it reminds me of things you would see on there. Ancient structures, the rocks walls that are fitted together
Mm-hmm.
where they talk about how the stones fit perfectly, and
Well,
they can't explain
You're
it.
speaking of Nashville, so we'll go into this. Human bones have been dug up in the cellar of a plantation where Judge Overton now lives, in Hampden County, 4 miles southwesterly from Nashville. I love how they used to. I love how they used to write. These bones were of extraordinary size. The underjaw bone of one skeleton very easily slipped over the jaw of Mr. Childress, a stout man, fully fleshed, very robust, and considerably over the common size. Just say he's fat.
Yeah, that's a really nice way to say that man's overweight.
He's big bone. These bones were dug up within the traces of ancient walls in the form of a square of 200 or 300 yards in length, situated near an excellent, never-failing spring of pure and well-tasted water.
It was well tasted.
The spring was enclosed within the walls. A great number of skeletons were found within the enclosure, a few feet below the surface of the earth. On the outer side were the traces of an old ditch and rampart, thrown up on the inside. Some small mounds were also within the enclosure. Now, this, if you could picture this in your head, is insane. And with this natural, beautiful spring that's in there, it's just awesome.
Yeah, because it sounds like they've made a whole area where they enclosed it, plus
You're
did
on,
the
Lori.
burials, plus did the mounds.
What Camden Park it is, we'll have to set
There you
that
go.
up.
Yes, I definitely want to go. I want to go. And so also in Nashville, sort of like just a couple of miles away from that discovery, there was another discovery in 1807 dug up on the plantation of Colonel Joel Lewis. And they dug up jawbones of a man which easily covered the whole chin and jaw of Colonel Lewis, who they say is a man of large size.
Let me ask you something. What the hell? Is it the first thing they did? Like, sir, I've dug up this jawbone. Let's try it on top of the colonel.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's pretty big.
They're men. The first thing they'll do is
Like, put it up to their own
yes,
face?
Exactly. There's a lot of articles where they'll take leg bones and they'll hold them up beside their legs to like judge the size of it. It's a man thing.
Yes, Amber, we have to get into Camden Park because the very fact that there is a giant mound there that's never been opened and it's haunted, so it's going in the book. It's going to have its own chapter. I'm going to talk somebody into going into the giant mound.
Road trip.
That is my bucket list. I want to be granted access into a giant mound. Or into a mound. I can't call it a giant mound, or they won't let me anywhere near it.
Right.
It'd be like, if I go up there and say, "Excuse me, Professor, can I get in that giant mound?" That's like red flag.
Well, now not all the mounds have giants in them, so you gotta hope you pick the right one.
I'll be like, I want to go to this, earthwork. And
Well, let me talk about this one from Ohio, and this is from
Chillicothe.
Chillicothe,
That's what I
Ohio.
call it when I used to wrestle there.
I don't know how to say that.
So just trivia, a little trivia question. So in all my pro wrestling years, Chillicothe, Ohio is where I took the DDT from Jake the Snake Roberts. He put the snake in my nether region as I was laying there unconscious.
In his pants. He put the snake down his pants.
And I also played the part of a mad Iranian that was teaming with Abdullah the Butcher. So I got the place all going.
He did the accent and everything.
Yes.
It
It was really a fun time, Chillicothe. So
in Chillicothe, Ohio, sometime around the World's Fair, I suppose, these two gentlemen, Warren Moorhead and Dr. Cresson, started doing some excavations, and the claims that they made one of the richest finds of the century in the way of prehistoric remains. They confined their excavation to a place called Hopewell Farm, and I think on that farm there's located about 20, so they say 20 odd Indian mounds. And so they were working on a mound that was 500 feet long and 200 feet wide, 28 feet high. And when they got down to a depth of 14 feet near the center of the mound, they exhumed the massive skeleton of a man encased in copper armor.
Oh my God, that is amazing.
It says the head was covered in an oval-shaped copper cap. The jaws had copper moldings. The arms were dressed in copper. Copper plates covered the chest and stomach. And on each side of his head, on protruding sticks, were wooden antlers ornamented with copper.
Oh my God, wait a second. You realize The red-headed giants? That makes the sense now, the whole copper top thing.
There you go. And if that wasn't enough, his mouth was stuffed with genuine pearls of immense size. Now, they were in a state of decay. I don't think they could save them, but his entire mouth, I don't know the purpose of stuffing the mouth with pearls, but they were in there. They also found around his neck a necklace of bear's teeth.
Wow.
Also set with pearls. And at the side of the skeleton was also found a female skeleton. So they assumed this was man and wife.
Did she have like a pearl necklace or anything?
They did not. They did not specify.
Okay. No, I'm just wondering.
And they believe that they dubbed this gentleman the king of the mound builders. He did sound very impressive.
Wow.
Very, very
impressive. I don't think I've heard of another one with that much regalia. So that's pretty awesome.
Yes.
I have to talk about one of my favorite parts of the giant lore, the horned skull of, how do you say this, Sayre?
I'm not sure.
I've
just been saying Sayre, Pennsylvania.
Sayre, Pennsylvania. It's the way it should be. So anyway, it's a horned skull, y'all. A skull. It's not a horned skull. The horned skull is completely different. Charleston Daily Mail. This comes from Dateline, September 20th, 1916. Sayre is a borough of Bradford County, Pennsylvania, 59 miles northwest of Scranton.
Don't. Just continue.
We have some stories about Scranton. The exact year is not clear, but during the 1880s, a large burial mound was discovered in Sayre. It was reported that a group of Americans uncovered several strange human skulls and bones. The skeletons belonged to the anatomically normal men, with the exception of bony projections located about 2 inches above the eyebrows. It appeared that the skulls had horns. The bones were characterized as giant, as they were representative of people over 7 feet tall. Scientists estimated that the bodies had been buried around 1200 CE. The archaeological discovery was made a reputable group of antiquarians, including Dr. G.P. Donahue and the Pennsylvania State Dignitary of the Presbyterian Church, A.B. Skinner of the American Investigating Museum, and W.K. Moorhead of Phillips Academy, Andover, Massachusetts. According to historical documents, the Sayre horned giant bones were sent to the American Investigating Museum in Philadelphia. The artifacts were later reported missing.
What?
They
got lost?
This was not the first time the gigantic horned skulls were unearthed. In North America. During the 19th century, similar skulls were discovered near Wellsville, New York, in a mining village close to El Paso, Texas.
Yes.
Nuts, man.
Yeah, it's not one of the more prevalent things that you have, but you do see that, and we're going to actually see it again in this particular presentation here in a little bit.
Right.
So there's one more giant thing we want to talk about that is one of the more popular historical accounts, and this is Lovelock Cave.
Yeah, we had to put this one in there, not because it's anywhere near the Appalachians, but just because of how much fame it has.
Right. So the story is that there were some men mining for guano in a cave, and in Lovelock, it's a small town about 80 miles northeast of Reno. So this is in Nevada. The miners reportedly found mummies preserved in the dry bat droppings. Ew. They were large, between 6.5 feet and 8 feet tall, and they had red hair. And they were reportedly they were lying in a layer of burnt material about 4 feet under the surface. And there's also a lot of like broken arrows and other artifacts around the area. Now, the legend of that area is of this group of giants, and this is an Indian legend from the area. There's a group of giants and how the giants would kill people and eat them.
Yeah.
And they describe them as white with red hair and very tall and cannibals. And so the Indians started a war against them when they entered their land. And I believe as the story goes, they trapped them in this cave and eventually set a large fire at the mouth of the cave and kept the fire going, and everybody that tried to get out, they would shoot them. Like, that's how they finally rid their area of these cannibalistic giants. So they did find these skeletons in this cave. Now, they got an archaeologist up there, and some of the remains were taken out, And there was a gentleman named L.L. Loud. He was an archaeologist with the University of California. And about a year after all of this was found, he sent some of the remains to the Smithsonian Institution. And the weird thing about this whole situation is that there are notes that are still on file, like digital notes, at this place called the Hearst Museum of Anthropology. It's, there's a reference number for it. It's an anthropological expedition of 1913. But while that particular museum has record of it, the Smithsonian does not have a record of it, and the University of California also seems to not have a record of any of these giant skeletons or materials or anything, even though some of the other artifacts from the same dig are there and they're displayed. There is no mention of giants, of skeletons, of ever receiving any of these things.
And look, we could do a conspiracy panel right now, and on the conspiracy panel, I could start it off with the Smithsonian and just on all the things that they have stolen and destroyed over the years. And the only reason I could say that is because I could pull you up, I don't know, a few hundred newspaper articles where the newspaper article will end with the bones were given over to the fine folks at the Smithsonian to, for further research.
The Smithsonian came in.
Either the Smithsonian is the most unorganized business in the history of the world, or they're throwing stuff away and hiding stuff, I don't know.
Now, these pictures on this slide, these are some skulls that, even though the remains were sent away, some of the people that discovered it were able to squirrel away a few of the skulls, and they used to be displayed in a place called the Humboldt Museum in Winnemucca, Nevada. They do not display these anymore. They did used to have them. I've seen accounts where people have gone by and asked about them, and they were shown the skulls in storage. But because there's an act now, it's from 1990, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. They don't display this kind of thing.
Right.
They try to treat the remains more diplomatically.
I would argue the fact that it predates the Native Americans, and
right, but I think they like to say that they're Native American remains, so they
I get you.
That.
Absolutely.
Yes. So, and that just brings up the whole, like you were talking about, the whole thing about the Smithsonian and how often giant remains are taken, and you can look articles. There's hundreds, thousands probably of articles. That all you have to do is go to the newspaper archives and search giant skeleton, giant remains, giant skeleton, and all of them you'll always hear about how the Smithsonian has come in and confiscated
even when
that.
it was founded, right? So the Smithsonian itself, just to touch on it very quickly because I really want to get into the dwarfs.
Yes.
The Smithsonian was founded in August 10th, 1846. That lines up with roughly that the height of us finding all these giants and pygmies and everything else. So what does the government always do, right? You're finding all this stuff, and it's like, well, we need to regulate it. We need to do something about it because it's going to rewrite all the history books. It's going to, and they also don't want it to look like they had high intelligence. They don't want it to. There's so much bigotry at the time, and that does play into it. Believe it or not,
it does. They didn't want anyone that may have been Native American to seem like they were more advanced than just hunting.
There's even stories of people at the time that they had battled. Some settlers teamed up with Native Americans and killed some giants. They drew pictures, just like a court stenographer or whatever. They,
right, like the court artist.
The court artist, because you can't take a video camera in there. Well, obviously they didn't have a video camera back then. They drew a picture, took it to the Smithsonian. The guy literally erased the depiction of the giant and redrew it smaller for their records.
And more Native American.
Right? So, and I'm not even going to spend any time on them. I want to jump to the MoonEyed People very quickly.
Oh, I love the MoonEyed People story. Can I do the MoonEyed People story? I love the story. So I love the story of MoonEyed People. It's a legend from North Carolina, and we're kind of getting away from giants for just a minute. And as the legend has it, the MoonEyed People were an entire race of physically small inhabitants that it's kind of an area around Murphy, North Carolina. They had very pale white skin, according to legend, bearded faces, large blue eyes, and they had trouble seeing during the day. And they would only come out at night, and that's how they got the name MoonEyed People. Now, when I say very pale, a lot of people have likened them to early albinos, things like that, like very just pale skin, pale eyes, couldn't go in the sun. So there's a place in North Carolina, the Cherokee County Historical Museum. They have tons of like Cherokee artifacts, tools, things like that. And there is an article that I read where there was a gentleman there that taught history. He loves the history of the area. And he was talking about how in 1838, that particular area was being sold off in lots. And this man named Felix Ashley, he bought 6 acres of the land, and in 1841 he was digging up his property, and because he was going to plant, and he unearthed this MoonEyed People effigy, and that's what you see this picture of right now. It's actually a very tall effigy, it has legs and everything, but it's this picture of these 2 small people with flat faces, and these are believed to be the MoonEyed People. So this particular statue does stay in the Cherokee County Historical Museum. You can go and see it whenever you want. And according to the legends, the Cherokee people, once the Cherokees moved into the area, they ran the MoonEyed People off and pushed them more into Tennessee, Middle Tennessee and West Tennessee. And I suppose they just didn't want them there when they moved into that particular area.
Yeah, and they tended to do that quite a bit, actually, but for good reason, right? The MoonEyed People were just creepy, and they were like, we're going to get rid of these guys, and the Giants, just because, they ate them. So, but speaking of little people, got to get into this. I'm going to try to get as many of these as I can. I know we had to start late. So,
yes, so we got a few minutes. So we have a few actual articles and things about different pygmies.
Well, this is the crazy thing, okay? They call them the Pygmies, whatever. That's a very inaccurate name. It's just these little people. It's a race of little people. I mean, we've got accounts of 18 inches tall. We've got accounts of 3 feet tall. The whole thing is they have found literally thousands of these skeletons in graveyards. A lot of times they're buried with the giants. They were here at the same time. Now, I know it sounds like a freak show, but yes, you had a 10-foot tall and an 18-inch person hanging out, right? So I don't know their relation to each other, except that there is burials out there where they're discovered together. And a lot of people don't know about the pygmy part of it. They don't know about how in depth it is. The Pygmy graveyard in Tennessee, an ancient graveyard of vast proportions, has been found in Coffee County. It's similar to those found in White County and other places in Middle Tennessee, but is vastly more extensive and shows the race of Pygmies who once inhabited this country were very numerous. The same peculiarities of position observed in White County graves are found in these. And it goes on to talk about the fact that they found 75,000 to 100,000 buried there.
These small ones.
Of these small. Now let me say that again. At this graveyard, this guy's plowing his field. This is in the newspaper, okay? In several newspapers. This actually made the New York Times, okay? 75,000 to 100,000 graves. And they were all like the 3-foot tall skeletons, and they were all found with a freaking conch shell, okay?
Yes.
In Tennessee, they were found with a conch shell. And like a little
in the grave with them, and they're all like identical.
Yeah, it's very, 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 very crazy. But the thing is, just going from there, you go like the Cliff Dweller skeleton declared that of a pygmy. This one, I'm not sure where that comes out of. Arizona, I believe.
Yeah, Arizona. It looks like Prescott, Arizona.
Yeah, Prescott, Arizona. And again, these are actual articles that that you can pull just like we did. But the skull shows no signs of immaturity. That's the thing that kept messing them up.
That's what's similar about all of these. That they look at the skulls, you can tell that it's an adult skeleton, but they're only 3 feet high or 18 inches tall and things like that, and they call them pygmies or dwarfs or little people. I think this next article, it's a really long article.
This is my favorite. Really,
it's about East Tennessee, I believe. Because
we've got literally hundreds of these articles on the dwarfs all through the United States, but this one is great because of just putting the pin on it for this area. Dwarf Americans, remains of a race unearthed in eastern Tennessee. have been found graves and skeletons of almost forgotten people, a legend that deals with the Mexican Aztecs. The Smithsonian Institution has undertaken a peculiar work in this locality. The people of the world who have paid lengthy visits to the hilly country known as East Tennessee have always been impressed with the sublimity and beauty of the mountains, the simplicity and superstition of the inhabitants, and the general air of sleepy mysteriousness surrounding everything. Ask one of these people where they would most expect to find a race of dwarves or giants, and the reply will be in East Tennessee. And recent developments seem to bear them out. For in the last few years, the remains of people less than 3 feet in height have been discovered in this country. And it goes on and on to really talk about and romanticize it. But listen, okay, this is national publications putting these stories out. It was so matter of fact about finding the dwarves and finding the giants that Abraham Lincoln famously included it in a speech of his. It was just a way of like the time Ronald Reagan talked about, imagine how it would be if we came together from an outside threat, you know? Right. It was that kind of deal.
I think he was talking about Niagara Falls. He took a trip to Niagara Falls, and he said something about the giant bones that lay in the mounds,
throughout these United States. Yeah.
And just said it.
Yeah, it was that matter of fact. Now think about that, and think about what you were taught in school and what you were not taught in school. Do you remember the class or the week in history that you covered giants that used to first inhabit this area, or the dwarves, or why in the heck it sounds like Tolkien? I mean, it's very, very insane. But we're out of time.
I just want to mention this one because this is the one with the horned skull. So this is one where Hans Augustus and James Hansen and Lee Ellsworth returned from a place called White River, where they have been hauling wood for an Indian agency, and they reported finding a skeleton of a horned man. But this one was only 3 feet tall with well-defined horns, again about 2 inches long near the temples. And it was found in the East Fork of the White River, close to a large
The
cave.
Horns are always in the same place, which is very interesting. But the horned little person is terrifying. just putting that out there. But it's also fantastic. Is that not cool? Is that the coolest thing you've ever heard?
I think that's amazing.
Real. Okay,
Yes.
This isn't some hyperbole. This is from ancient accounts. Yes, but when you have people telling the same story, and anybody on here who's ever researched Bigfoot or UFOs, you used to saying this kind of stuff, right? If all these people never talked, and you have 1,000 stories from people that had no way to talk to each other, and they're all the same, there's probably some fire to that smoke.
Right.
So
the real question, I guess what you should leave it is, why don't we have these remains? Why don't we have this evidence? Why don't they talk about it? And that's really the real question, the real mystery.
Yeah, that's
to the whole thing.
That is the thing we're trying to research right now. That is what drives us, is because we're trying to figure out what is so dangerous that why do you have to keep this from us? What is it hiding? Is it part of a bigger mystery that includes everything and tells us something we need to know,
or a bigger conspiracy?
So hopefully we piqued your interest, got you out hunting for it now too, and hope you find it as interesting as we did. But thank you so much for being part of our panel.
Yes,
and we had fun giving it.
We did, and we hope that you come by our booth and say hi.
And hopefully next time it'll be live in person, and we can do this. We can do this thing again in person.
All right. Appreciate it, guys.
And we tried staying in time.
I think we did. I think we did pretty good. All right, we're gonna head back over to our booth. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, guys. I wonder if our booth is working.
Hopefully our booth is working.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to clear out of the panel room.
Okay.
And let me make sure